with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. So, as we begin our lesson tonight, let me roll through a couple of the first screens. You've seen these screens before, and just basically it's a timeline of Paul's missionary journeys. He went to Corinth during his second missionary journey, somewhere around 51 CE. And then he's writing this about 4 years later from Ephesus, writing for the first book of 1 Corinthians, which is actually the second letter that he had sent to them, as we've discussed before. Now, and then this is the chart I made up for you that will list the Old Testament quotes that Paul had in 1 Corinthians. And actually, this particular lesson tonight, chapter 4, there are no quotes from the Old Testament. So you're just not going to get to hear what Rashi or even Ezra says or any of the other of the Chazal. Let's jump right into it. Are there any comments or questions from last week that you might have, or what may, anything about the Corinthians? First, chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. So let each one think of us in this way, as Messiah's helpers and stewards of the mysteries of God. In this case, moreover, what is required of stewards is to be found trustworthy. Now, you remember from last week that Paul is kind of laying it out for these guys that, hey, you guys think you're so smart. You're not really smart, because your smartness, your wisdom is nothing but foolishness to God, even though you think, and a lot of your contemporaries in the Grecian world think that the cross and redemption of people through faith and trust and belief in Yeshua is foolishness. Well, you guys are the ones that are foolish when you're trusting in men and the secular humanity of the day, and just Greek philosophy in itself was kind of like what we have today, where people that I would call it almost, today it would be secular humanism. Back in those days, they would have had several different ones, like Gnosticism and so forth. But anyway, they looked at man as being the penultimate authority and the smart guys, and the Corinthians just loved the Greek culture. They were Hellenists through and through, and so Paul's trying to pull them away from that a little bit, saying, hey, look, that really doesn't make any difference. So, and the reason that you guys are, you're not developing is because I know it, because you're fighting over whose disciples you are, who's your leader. Some of you say me, some of you say Apollos, some say Peter, and some say that the real holy ones of you guys there in Corinth, you're saying that, oh, I am a follower of Yeshua, and that only. And so basically that's a snobby way of saying that we get our marching orders directly from the Lord, because we are more in tune with the Lord, and so that's kind of a spiritual snobbiness on their part, and so Paul had already laid that out in chapters 1 through 3, and pretty much told them, you're not as smart as you think you are. And so now he starts out this way, that so let each of us, let each one of you guys in Corinth think of us, me and Apollos and Peter and whoever, as Messiah's helpers, ministers. We're helpers, and we're stewards of the mysteries of God. What is the mysteries of God? Well, the mysteries of God is That's the gospel, or the story of Yeshua and the gifts of the Spirit. All of these different things that Paul and Apollos and Peter were bringing to them. Those are the mysteries of God. Because remember, a lot of these guys were pagans, or had been pagans, or if they weren't pagans, then they were mainstream Jews maybe, and so they had not heard the fullness of Yeshua. And so I think that's that's fair to say that that all of them needed to be taught in some way or fashion. So he says that learners should view their teachers as servants of God and stewards, rather than as party leaders. Here they got the Pauline party, the Apollos party, the Peter's party, and all these different ones. And so that sets up division within the congregation. Paul's trying to knock that down so that they're all worshiping and progressing in unity. Now, he used a different word for servant here in chapter 4 than he did in chapter 3. In chapter 4, he used the term for servant as hyperatai. And those of you who are Greek scholars, you can correct me if you wish, because I am not a Greek scholar. So I may put the emphasis on the wrong syllable when it comes to Greek. But anyway, hyperatai, and then in 1 Corinthians 3 and 5, he used the words diakonoi as far as servants, and that's the normal word for servant is diakonoi. And but this word here that he used in this particular case, that we're helpers, and so the helpers, meaning servants or as stewards, in this case it's hyperatai and hyperatai, and that means normally an under rower, or a guy on the Roman galleys. Those ships that had the oars, and so let me show you one of those like that. All right, so he's saying that these guys, we are under rowers. We are guys that are in these kind of ships. Now, this is a bireme. It's only got 2 levels of oars on it, and then a trireme would be one that had 3 levels of oar on it. And so if you're just looking at this thing, it would be propelled from right to left. Okay, you see the eye down here at the bottom. All right, that's the front of the ship, and this thing here is the battering ram, and they would use that then to slam into other ships, and that was one of their primary means of it's just maritime bumper pools, bumper cars is what they were doing out there. And so here is a picture. Now, this is a picture of the inside of a trireme, and I think that it's quite highly stylized, because I think it would be probably more cramped than that. And but you can see that these were, you hear of people called galley slaves. Well, that's not guys that worked in the galley on ships. My very first job going to sea was I worked in the galley, and that meant that I worked in the kitchen, and that's I learned a lot of culinary skills working in the galley on the Coast Guard cutter Eagle. And Alan probably has a sea story or two about that kind of thing too. So anyway, this is what Paul is referring to now there as the hyperatai. Why? Because he's saying we are under the authority of someone else. This guy right here that's I guess this guy, I don't know, this guy here is the drummer. He's the one that's keeping the pace, but maybe it's this guy here that's in charge. I don't know, but there's somebody in charge of all of these galley slaves and counting out the cadence for them to row. If you've ever done rowing in big boats like racing stuff, or in the old days where we had actual lifeboats that were propelled by oars, it takes a lot of practice and coordination to make this thing work. And so that's why Paul is using uh, this mental picture here. These were slaves that rode under the authority of a man. He coordinated all their individual efforts, and it propelled the ship. So when they did it right, the ship would sail straight. And if something happened and another ship came along and clipped off the oars on one side, well, when they would try to row, then all they would do is just go round and round and round in circles. And so therefore they were ineffective. And so what Paul is saying here, as long as you stay under the authority of the guy in charge and he's pounding out the rhythm and the direction and so forth, you go straight and you are an effective fighting ship. And so, but then he uses also the word steward. And that was a steward was one that was generally, again, a slave, but he was totally devoted to the interests and the resources of his master. Now, a lot of times a steward like that, think of Joseph in Egypt when he was in the household of Potiphar. He was a steward. He ran the household. And so that's what Paul has in mind here of the idea of a steward. And so he says what's required of a steward is that they be found trustworthy. If they are totally in charge of all of their master's belongings and their bank accounts and the servants and all of everything that they own, then the most important thing for that servant, that steward, to be is honest and true, trustworthy. So he's pointing out here that the apostle's humble position that he was in, he's saying that he belongs to Yeshua, the Messiah, and they are trusted, yet they are accountable to in that position under God. So and then what I said before, the mysteries of God here refer to the truths of the gospel and the story of the cross. All right. Any comments or questions there so far? All right, let's go ahead. Verse 3. But to me, it matters very little to be judged by you or any other human or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself, for I know of nothing against myself, yet I am not justified by this. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, do not judge anything before the time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light the things hidden in darkness and also make clear the motives of the heart. Then the praise for each one will come from God. Now, we have to remember that Paul, everything that Paul does comes from his eschatological view of the world. What do I mean by that? His eschatology is the study of the end times. It's when we say we're going to be studying eschatology, it's talking about maybe the book of Revelation, what's going to happen to all mankind. It can be our religious eschatology that when we talk about the end of time through the millennium and what's written in Revelation, or it could be another kind of eschatology. It just means that it's a study of what's going to happen in the end of human race or the end of the world or both. And so, but Paul had his own, his view of the world was that in his lifetime or very shortly thereafter, it was going to be the end of the world in that Yeshua was going to come back to the earth and set up his earthly kingdom. So everything that they had known before would be gone away, and we would begin the Jewish concept of the Olam Haba, the world to come. All right, so keep that in mind as he's talking about these things. So he goes on, and so I don't know if I finished reading all this. Let's start back up at verse 5. Therefore, do not judge anything before the time. Wait until the Lord comes. See, wait until the Lord comes. He's still waiting on that thing that it's imminent to him. That it just. And remember, he told people that he said it'd be better for you don't even marry, but just let's get the word out. Let's get people saved because the Lord is coming back any minute now. And so that was his end time view, his eschatological view. So remember that word and try to use it in some sentences sometimes, and just wow somebody sometime about your command of big words. Okay, so the only person that can judge a servant or a steward or something, the only one that can really judge them is the one that has authority over them, say for the master, or if it was a servant that was lower down, then his boss. That's the only one that has the power and the authority to judge that person. So all of those other people there in Corinth, they had no right, in Paul's view, to judge him or to question him, because he is the one that brought the gospel to them. And then all of a sudden they're smarter than their teacher. And so that's what he's getting at here. And so he tells them, said, look, I couldn't care less what you guys think about what I'm doing or whether I'm right or wrong, because I just don't care. It doesn't matter to me. And so he's to the point that he says, I won't be judged by you or any human court. He said, because you cannot judge me, because I know I'm doing what I was sent here to do, and that was to bring people to faith in Yeshua. And he says, in fact, heck, I don't even judge myself. And that and what's the reason for that? Well, because if you're any of you that have ever had to write out performance evaluations for people, they have we all have a view of how we're doing on the job. And so, yeah, I'm doing real well, and the boss is thinking, no, you're not doing so real well. I can remember back in the day when I was in a position to where I had all 5 military services working under me, as well as civilians. So I had 6 different kinds of fitness reports to write for people. And then it was also further divided up into whether they were officers or enlisted people. So all 5 services, officer and enlisted. So that's 10 different types of fitness reports, and then civilians. And so, and then even that was further broken down, because some of the civilians came from different kinds of agencies, and so they had a completely separate type of fitness report. So what did I do? I told everybody, I said, look, I brought them in, and I says, you are doing a great job for me, and I want you to get promoted. I want you to to stay here, and I want to show my appreciation for how well you're doing, but I don't know your system. And so therefore you will have to write the fitness report that will get you promoted and use the right words. The Air Force had specific language that they had to have for their officers to get promoted. Same with the Navy and the Coast Guard and the Marines and the Army dudes, all of that. Everybody had their own little buzzwords that they had to have to get promoted. And then, of course, there were also buzzwords that would get a person canned if they weren't doing a good job. I mean, like you tell somebody on a fitness report saying, this guy is out of his depth in a parking lot puddle. That's probably not going to get him promoted. So you just had to know. And so Paul is saying, you know, I can write my own fitness report here, but I won't do that because, you know, I don't know anything against myself. I'm not going to say that, yeah, I do this terribly, and I don't. I'm not a good teacher. I'm not a good preacher. I'm not a good whatever. He says, no, I'm not even going to try to judge myself whether I'm good at this or that or whatever. He says, I'm going to wait until the one who judges me, and he's talking about Yeshua at the end of time. Remember his end time view, his eschatological or eschatological, however you want to put the emphasis, view of the end times. And so, and he's telling them, don't judge anything before the time. Wait until the Lord comes. He's the one that's going to judge things, and he'll bring all of everything to light. And you know, he's gonna uncover all of your motives, all of everything that's going on. He is the one that's going to do this. You cannot do it. You should not be judging me or Apollos or Peter or even yourselves. So that his overriding idea that Yeshua was coming just could any day, that's what drove him. That Paul was a driven man. And so they were they were not really the only entity out there that became disillusioned with their leader, their minister, and so here he's trying to write something that would also be universal to other congregations. So, and he's saying that remember that we are servants of the Lord, and we're looking for his approval later on, not per se the approval of people today. A lot of times ministers will do things that are not very popular, or they bring a message that's not very popular, but it's one that needs to be spoken, one that needs to be said. And oftentimes, if you preach the truth from the Bible, directly from the Bible, being as how it's not very popular and it steps on people's toes and it doesn't tickle their ears, then your congregation might be pretty small. But if you can go in there and tell them what they want to hear and tell them you deserve a break today, and the old McDonald gospel, then you might have a great big congregation. However, at the end of days, at the end of time, you're going to be judged. Did you preach the word and not just words? And so I want to be found guilty of preaching the word when the end time comes. All right. So any comments or questions on that segment? Okay. Now, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, brothers and sisters, so you might learn from us not to go beyond what is written. Then none of you will be puffed up in favor of one against the other. For who makes you different? And what do you have that you did not receive? But if you did receive it, why do you boast as if you had not received it? So here Paul is again being Pauline in some of the way that he writes stuff, and I'm sure a lot of it is kind of like, he's saying these things. It's written in Greek, and sometimes in the translation it doesn't come out as strongly or maybe as nicely as we would like to have it, either way. And so, you know, it's in dealing with Paul, sometimes it's all Greek to me. So he had in chapters 1, 2, and 3, he had described himself and Apollos in metaphors as farmers, builders. Remember, he said he, as the expert builder, he laid the foundation, and now he said we are nothing but servants and stewards. So to exceed what God had written about their authority and who they were and so forth would be going beyond the scriptures. We'll see that again in the 15th chapter of Corinthians. So if his readers, the people at Corinthians, could avoid this pitfall, they wouldn't take pride in having one teacher over another teacher. It's not the teachers that make the, well, teachers can make a difference, but it's not the teacher that's going to have us standing before God and in the judgment day and saying, you did good, you were just like my servant so and so. No, he's going to say, okay, did you meet up with my standard of holiness? Not what did Paul say or what did Apollos say, or how closely did you follow Peter? He says, how closely did you follow the word? And that's what Paul is trying to tell them here, that they cannot go by a person, and then kind of what that does, it just leads to an arrogant attitude. He calls it puffed up, and in the Greek it's called physiomai, and it's an attitude or an activity that just smacks of human pride rather than relying on godly wisdom and love. And so you'll see that in later on in this chapter, and then in chapter 5, chapter 8, chapter 13, that he talks about this idea of being puffed up. Don't be puffed up. And so this frequent use of the word here of the physiomai, it actually identifies one of the Corinthians' main problems, and that is their attitude was wrong because their outlook was wrong. Paul then proceeded to deal with this and the rejection of him that it produced. Their attitude produced a rejection of Paul, and so he deals with this in the rest of the chapter. So the apostle reminded the Corinthians that they are not just intrinsically superior to anyone or any else, and that that particular attitude of judging others is just wrong. It's not to be done. God has given them everything that they had, and consequently they should be grateful and not boastful. All right, so moving along. Already you are full. Already you have become rich. Without us, you have become kings. Indeed, I wish you were kings, so we also might be kings with you. For it seems to me that God has put us, the emissaries, on display last of all, like men sentenced to death. For we have become a spectacle to the world, both to angels and to people. We are fools for Messiah's sake, but you are wise in the Messiah. We are weak, but you are strong. You are honored, but we are dishonored. So what is Paul doing here? Oh, he is laying it on thick with the sarcasm. And that type of language and that type of persuasive language was very, very popular during that time. I don't think really it has lost a great deal of its popularity even today. People are still sarcastic sometimes when they want to get a point across. So his readers change this. His readers were behaving as though they'd already received their commendation, their reward at the judgment seat of the Messiah. Now this is kind of an indication of their over-realized eschatology. I mean, they should have been conducting themselves under, like under rowing servants. Like, remember the galley, the Roman galley there, where you got the rows of oarsmen, and they should have been conducting themselves like that, under the authority, under the direction of someone else, and paying attention to managing God's word faithfully, being the steward. And so it's ironic then that Paul said he wished the time for rewards had arrived already, so he could enjoy reigning with his readers. But unfortunately, we all know that the suffering must precede the glory. The irony here is just absolutely devastating. He's cutting them off at the knees, how they perceive themselves. It was really, I would say, masterfully overstated in Corinthians 4:8 there. And what is it that he said? Already you are full. Already you have become rich. Without us, you have become kings. Indeed, I wish you were kings, so that we also might be kings with you. So he's being just really, really sarcastic. And this is undoubtedly the way that they think that they should be, but they're pretty great in their own mind. But the way that he is, I mean, it's they're not doing what they ought to be. They're thinking themselves at this level, and yet they're completely in a different place in terms of their standing before God and their maturity level and so forth. They thought that they were really something, but Paul is saying, nah, not so much. And so now going on with the imagery there in verse 9. And let me read it again. For it seems to me that God has put us, the emissaries, on display last of all, like men sentenced to death, for we have become a spectacle to the world, both to angels and to people. Now, Paul may have had the Roman games in mind here. That's specifically battles between condemned criminals and wild beasts in the amphitheaters and the Colosseums and so forth, all over the world, all over the Roman world. Another possibility that he was thinking of was the Roman triumph, when and that's something that he uses later on in 2 Corinthians, at when they would have a war and then they would capture their prisoners, the enemy, and they would have a big parade in the streets of Rome, and they would the conquering general would be in a chariot, and they would put a laurel on his head, and people would line the streets, and they would cheer and just applaud and give him honor and so forth. Ironically, though, too, when they would do that, there would be a slave in the chariot with the general, and his duty was to whisper in the ear of the conquering general. He would whisper, "All glory is fleeting. All glory is fleeting." Over and over again. That was his job. He was supposed to do that, to remind this general that this is not permanent. It's not going to last. Be careful, because you're only as good as your last victory. So anyway, they would bring these guys. That was a rabbi trail, not in my notes. All right, they would parade these prisoners down the streets of Rome, and typically they would parade them through the Roman streets with not a stitch of clothing on them, because that was the shame. That was the showing that these guys are totally helpless. They have no way at all of defending themselves, even covering themselves, and so that was part of the shame. And so at the end of the procession, then they would have these prisoners that were going to be killed in the amphitheater, the ones that they're going to parade through and feed them to the lions or the bears or the tigers. Oh my! And that was one group. And then also for the conquered generals and officers, they would bring them to a place, and they would of public execution. And that was not nearly as much fun though as watching the ones battling the wild animals. But that's what Paul is trying to the imagery that it seems like that Paul is trying to bring up here, that they were ultimately a humiliated group. They were the leaders, and their sufferings for the cause of the Messiah, it was common knowledge. These guys, they went through a lot. So how inappropriate then was it for the Corinthians to be living, they were living the good life in one of the wealthiest cities in the known world, rather than joining in the suffering with their teachers. So one commentator said the Corinthians, in their blatant pride, were like the conquering general displaying the trophies of his prowess. The apostles were like the little group of captives, men doomed to die. To the Corinthians, the Christian life meant flaunting their pride and their privilege and reckoning up their achievement. To Paul, though, it meant a humble service ready to die for the Messiah. And so these are the contrasts that Paul is bringing out here between the apostles and their lifestyle, what they were doing, and the lifestyle of the Corinthians. And he's just clarifying these differences in the conditions that they were living in. So natural men, just the normal run of the mill Greek, thought that the apostles were fools, but they were willing to suffer this. The apostles were willing to suffer this for the sake of the cross, for the sake of getting the gospel out. Now, the Corinthians and others, on the other hand, on Tevye, on the other hand, they regarded themselves as prudent in their behavior as believers, because they didn't get into that well, what would we say? That old time religion. They wouldn't get into that. They were more enlightened, and they knew the right kind of buzzwords so as not to offend anyone. Kind of like mainstream Christianity today, where, oh, it's okay if they live that kind of lifestyle, because there are many ways to salvation, and you hear that from mainstream, just big time pastors and televangelists today, that, well, we shouldn't really judge people, and we can judge their lifestyle though. And there's all sorts of ways that they can come to the Lord. And I'm sure that there's going to be, I'll say it, these people are saying, I'm sure there's going to be homosexuals in heaven. I'm just as sure that there won't be. But that's what Paul is saying here. You guys are using the language and coming up with these things to make you look, not so foolish, or just that you're okay. You got a different religion, but you're enlightened. You're not like Paul and Apollos, who those guys are, man, they are hardcore. They are fundamentalists. And fundamentalist has come to have a a bad connotation to it. That's a pejorative in many cases. But what it did is, the Corinthians looked at themselves as being distinguished and looked on the apostles as being meh, kind of dishonorable. All right. So does that, any comments or questions? So, go ahead.
So when somebody calls you a fundamentalist, then you say thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I guess depending on what they're trying to call a fundamentalist. If they're trying to compare me to that wackadoodle church out in Kansas that was going around dishonoring our veterans when they die, our soldiers and Marines when they died, in their funerals, and they were trying to disrupt their funerals, the media called them fundamentalists. And in that case, then I would beg to differ. No, I am not that kind of fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And so you got to be careful. Some of this language just gets you really, gets you wound up if you're not careful. All right. So going on to 1 Corinthians 4 and 11, it says, to this very hour, we are both hungry and thirsty, dressed in rags and mistreated and homeless. We toil, working with our own hands. When we are cursed, we bless. When we are persecuted, we endure. When we are stranded, we speak kindly. When we become the scum of the earth, the dregs of all things, even to this moment. So Paul, then, he proceeded to detail the dishonor that befalls all of those who bring on the message of the cross. And the Greeks despised people who did manual labor, as Paul had done in Corinth. Remember, he was a tent maker. He worked. And so, yeah. And so they kind of looked down on him. I can remember living in Panama, where we lived in a very high-end area of Panama City, and which was right around the embassy, because that's where we were required to live. But being, since we're Americans, well, what do American men do? Sometimes when they want to do something with their vehicle, well, we pop the hood, we get our tools out, we jump in there and get dirty and work on our own cars and stuff. Well, to the Panamanian aristocracy there, where amongst whom we lived, that was just terrible. Why would these people, this is beneath them. They should not be going down there and crawling under their car and changing their own oil or doing this or that and the other. It was not something that was done. And the Greeks looked at that the same way. And so they viewed what Paul was doing. That's the work of slaves. So and then Paul goes on to talk about what he does when these things happen. And to the world, it's foolish to bless those that curse us, but this is what Paul did following the teaching. He was following the example of Yeshua. And so all these descriptions of the apostle, they emphasize the complete depth and the concentration, the what they would go through and they were willing to do to proclaim the gospel. And so they did this. They did so even though people who viewed them, they looked at these things naturally, called them fools. They said, well, if that's being a fool, then let me be a fool for Yeshua. Yes, I will do that. I will be that person. And so that's what Paul is telling them. So now in this section here, Paul had contrasted the view of the Corinthians with that of the apostles, their worldview. And basically the worldview of the Corinthian people in that congregation were virtually Hellenistic. They were almost identical to the natural unsaved people. The viewpoint of the apostles, Paul and Apollos and the Peter and the others, whom the Corinthians, they said, well, they followed them, but they followed pretty shallowly. They didn't follow them hook, line, and sinker. So not only were the Corinthians not wise, but they were also proud and arrogant and puffed up. All right. And so going ahead, 14 and 15. I do not write these things to make you ashamed, but to warn you, as my dearly loved children. For though you may have 10,000 guardians in Messiah, yet you do not have many fathers. For in Messiah Yeshua, I became your father through the good news. So Paul's, we'll get my lesson over here. Paul, his purpose in writing to these guys was not to humiliate the Corinthians. That was not what he's wanted to do, because other congregations would read this epistle. He did want to admonish them, though, as strongly, like a father would talk to his children, that he is concerned about their behavior, concerned about their future, concerned about what is going to happen to them and how they acted. So they had many tutors or guardians. Paul talks about the Torah being the pedagogoi, and that's what there's really, well, it's a kind of a private tutor, pedagogos, and so he says that you can have many tutors, and that's what they would do. They would have a tutor. People would have especially in the Greek world and the Hebrew world, they would have a tutor, rich people, for their sons, and they would teach them, and they would accompany the boy everywhere he went, to school and back, and he would be heard him recite all of his lines, everything he's supposed to do, taught him good manners, and generally looked out after him. He was bringing him up to be a leader, a natural part of the aristocracy or being to the position in which he was born. If you're born into a rich family, you're expected then to act like a rich patrician. And so that's what Paul says. Sometimes he described the Torah as that. It's something that brings us along to the point where we become believers in Yeshua. He was our guardian. So, but the pedagogos, pedagogos, that's the one, and he would be respected in the household. He would be someone that received certain honor in the household, because he was generally the one that brought the young master along and brought him up to be respectable in society. And so there was a measure of respect, but it did not reach the level of the respect of the boy's father. The boy's father was the man. And so that's what Paul is saying here now, that you got a lot of teachers. You can have many teachers and guardians and so forth, but there is only one spiritual father, and he says, that was me. I'm the one that started this congregation. I'm the one that put it together and taught you all from the very beginning. Remember, he spent 18 months there teaching them. And so he's saying that, there you may have lots of teachers with all these other guys, and they're good, they're honorable, and they're good people, but there's only one me. He's trying to establish his authority. All right, going ahead. Oh boy. I urge you, therefore, be imitators of me. For this reason, I have sent you Timothy, my dearly loved and faithful child in the Lord. He will remind you of my ways in Messiah, just as I teach everywhere in every community. So Paul concluded this section of the epistle. And he's going to, the first 4 chapters, some people say that was all he intended to write, but then he kept on going. But he's sending Timothy in. Why? Timothy was a trusted lieutenant that Timothy knew everything about what Paul taught and how he taught and what the mindset was. And so he's bringing him into Corinth so that he's the substitute or the surrogate father that Timothy was going to be. So I don't know. It's just he was bringing him on so that his authority and his teaching would be carried on, just as if Paul could have been there himself. All right. So then we get down to verse 16 and let's see, where did I put that? All right. Okay, I read that already. Paul is again once he gets to that point, he's reasserting his authority, and so he's and as such, then he is trying to tell them, wake up here and do what you're supposed to do. I'm the authority figure, not all of these other people. You were born through me, and so that's where you must, you must stay in and under that authority. So, Paul actually his life was, as if we are leaders today, and some of you are, maybe you're leaders in your wherever you are in the world, maybe if nothing else, just your family. You not only have to teach the gospel, but you have to teach how the gospel works in and out of daily life and how to conduct yourself. So it's not enough to just know the Bible, but you have to know how, you talk the talk and you walk the walk. And so that's why Paul is saying, okay, follow me and do what I do. He's not one of those leaders that says, well, follow me and do what I tell you to do. Don't do what I do. But Paul is saying, no, you do what I do and you'll be okay. And so so he's appealing to these people as a father to a child. And so then he uses this word puffed up. He says, now some are puffed up as though I were not coming to you, but I will come to you soon if the Lord is willing, and I will find out not the talk of those who are puffed up, but their power. For the kingdom of God does not consist of talk, but power. So, boy, he's letting them have it here. And basically, they'd said, well, Paul's not here. He won't be here. So, we can kind of do what we want to because we're no longer under his authority. And, I've heard people do that, say things like that, well, I don't answer to any man. I only answer to the authority of God. Duh. And it's arrogant, just totally arrogant. For anybody to come up with that, because if you're a leader of a congregation or a leader of anything, you are accountable to the most senior person in that organization, meaning the oldest, the gray-headedest person, or down to that newborn baby. You are accountable for the welfare and the well-being of each one of those individuals. So yes, you are accountable to each one of those if you're going to be a true servant of the Lord. So, but Paul says, I'm coming back, and when I do, I'm not going to just sit and talk about your talk and your words. We're going to get to see, okay, how much power do you have? Because the kingdom of heaven, kingdom of God, is not about talking the talk. It's about walking the walk. And so what he's telling them is that when we come back, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting with you guys. And we're going to get to the bottom of this. And I'll point out to you how that you're not living right. You're just talking and you're not in the power. You're not living and working and walking in the power of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh. And that's what he's telling them here now. Just wait till I come back. I am coming back if the Lord wills it. And when I do, stand by for heavy rolls. And so it gets to the very last verse, and it says, so what do you want? It says, shall I come to you with a rod, or in love and a spirit of gentleness? So he kind of lays it out there to them, and how they responded to him is going to determine how he comes back to them. Is he going to come back as a stern disciplinarian or as the loving father? He'll have to do both, really, in reality. But they have the opportunity to get on board with Paul before he actually gets there. And so there we have it. That concludes that chapter. It's kind of an interesting chapter, and we see kind of a difference. We see what Paul is really made of here, because he can be the humblest of persons, but boy, he can also be a firebrand and get after you with both barrels if he had to. And so we see the passion of Paul, and because of his end time view, you see why he is the way he is. So, all right. Any comments or questions that anybody might have over this lesson? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and cut off the live streams while people may have it. Warren, I got you. Hang on just a second, and I'm gonna tell everybody Lila Tov. Remember, Yom Kippur starts Wednesday night, and so we will be having Yom Kippur service, the Kol Nidre service Wednesday night at 6:30 at Tree of Life, and then 10:30 the next morning we'll have the day of Yom Kippur service. So that's for those of us that those of you that are in Tree of Life congregation. So Lila Tov, we'll see you during the week or next week.